first, only gays and IV drug users were being killed by AIDS. But now we know every one of us could be devastated by it.
By now, surely everyone has heard about AIDS, and all the sensible people are a bit worried about it. After all those gloomy predictions seem to be coming true. The epidemic is sweeping right across the world. Already, hundreds of thousands of people are known to be infected. And eventually, the death toll may reach into the millions. Sooner or later, someone close to every single one of us will be touched by this epidemic. But to be worried is not sufficient. If we're worried, it may disturb our sleep at night, but it won't necessarily protect us from AIDS. For that protection, we need facts. We need facts about how the AIDS virus is spread. When we understand how the virus is spread, then we can take steps to protect ourselves. Fortunately, these facts are now well established and are really quite simple. The AIDS virus is called HIV, or human immunodeficiency virus. This outer coat of the virus is made of lipid, or fat, and this makes the virus very fragile. The virus is rapidly destroyed by drying, and because of this, it cannot exist outside of the body. Again, because the virus is so fragile, it's very easy to kill it in the home. Household bleach will do, and it doesn't have to be anything special. The cheapest form of supermarket bleach is quite sufficient. Now, there will be situations where we can't use bleach on carpets, furniture, and so on, and in those circumstances, ordinary methylated spirits will do. The 70% methylated spirits we find in a supermarket or hardware store. But probably our best ally is soap and water. When we wash our hands, we physically remove the virus, but then we wash it away and destroy it. And of course, hot water. When that water gets to 60 degrees centigrade, and 60 degrees centigrade is the temperature where I want to pull my hand out because it's getting too hot, it is quite hot enough to kill the virus. This means HIV is killed by the dishwasher at home. It's killed by a hot cycle in an ordinary domestic washing machine. The hard part about killing HIV is to think about it. Once we've thought about it, it's very easy to kill it. Now, these are simple rules, but we can use them to learn how to protect ourselves. Because the AIDS virus cannot exist outside of the body, it can't lie in wait for us in a toilet or a bathroom, or indeed anywhere else to infect us. We can only become infected in 3 ways. The first of these ways is by sexual intercourse. And here we must learn to grade risk. The most risky activity is receptive anal intercourse. That means sex through the back passage, particularly for the person on the receiving end. Usually this involves 2 men, but not necessarily so. But let's be very sure. HIV may be transmitted from man to woman and from woman to man by vaginal intercourse. The situation with oral sex is less clear, but we are now receiving reports that indicate that the virus may be transmitted by oral sex as well. So while we can grade the degree of risk, we must regard all forms of sexual activity as potentially risky. The second way is blood-to-blood spread. Now, until 1985, that meant infections through blood transfusions, or for haemophiliacs, through clotting factors. In 1985, the safety of our blood supply was restored, and since that time, blood-to-blood spread usually means intravenous drug users who share their needles and syringes. If this man shares his needle and syringe, he is also sharing small amounts of his blood. And if he's infected, he may share the virus as well. Now, if I pricked myself with that needle, with a needle wet with fresh infected blood, will I get the AIDS virus? The answer is I may. Probably the chances are about 4 in 1,000. And these are probably about the same chances that an emergency worker, police or ambulance personnel would have of becoming infected if they cut themselves with something wet with fresh infected blood, or get that fresh blood into an open wound. About 4 chances in 1,000. The third mode of spread is mother to baby, and this usually occurs before the baby is born. It seems likely that some cases of infection will occur during the process of birth, and there are several reports now which suggest that in the first few hours of life, a baby can be infected from infected breast milk. 3 modes of spread: sexual intercourse, blood-to-blood spread, mother to baby. Now, if those are the only ways in which the virus can be spread, we can be very confident about how it is not spread. Probably the most important is that the virus is not spread by social contact. It is not spread by touching, by hugging and kissing, by sharing eating utensils, bathrooms and toilets. In short, it is not spread by any activity short of sexual intercourse. How can we be sure? In the United States, there are more than 1 million infected people, many more in Africa. These people, adults and children, are often living in families. They have all these normal family contacts. And yet, provided you exclude the sexual partners, there is not a single case of transmission in this situation. The virus is not spread by social contact. But isn't it true that the virus is in saliva? Yes, indeed, in other secretions as well, but in very low concentrations. I think the most reassuring facts come from dentists. In the United States now, there must be at least 1 million times a year where a dental worker becomes in contact with saliva from an infected person. Very careful studies have been done, and yet there has not been a single incident where a dental worker has been infected with HIV where one of these other risk factors cannot be identified. The virus is not spread by saliva. The other big worry is stinging or biting insects, in particular mosquitoes, because of course mosquitoes can transmit some viruses. But there is an important difference. With those viruses, the mosquito itself becomes infected and the virus multiplies within it. The AIDS virus is HIV, human immunodeficiency virus. It does not grow in other animals, it does not grow in mosquitoes, and the evidence is now very clear: AIDS is not spread by mosquitoes. Coming back to how it's spread, let's now look at the events that occur once infection is established. And at first nothing happens, at least nothing we can detect. When a person becomes infected with a virus, they will make antibodies. These antibodies are designed to seek out and to destroy that virus. This is so with HIV as well. And although the antibodies to HIV won't kill the virus, at least they provide us with a test, a marker of infection. But this is where we run into the problems. Here we have a graph of the events after infection, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks later. The amount of antibody up here. Now, it would come as no surprise to learn that the body makes antibody slowly at first, and then it picks up like that. When you think about it, it should also be no surprise that you need a certain amount of antibody in the system before our test can pick it up. And in this person, it has taken almost 10 weeks for the test to become positive. Another person might become positive in 1 month, 2 months, or even 3 months. Rarely, it may even take a little longer. We call this the window period. This is the time when the person carries the virus and therefore is infectious, but their blood test will still be negative. Now, the window period is only a short part of a long and complex process. Let's review the whole of that event. As we've said, in any community, there will be a whole lot of people who will place themselves at risk by their activities. Some of those people will become infected and will enter the window period, the time when they carry the virus, but their blood test is still negative. Now, towards the end of the window period, they may have a short illness, often a bit like glandular fever. In the real world, this doesn't matter a lot because it is non-specific and it doesn't really help with the diagnosis. At the end of that time, the antibody appears. We say the individual has become antibody positive. The key thing about this stage is that there are no signs and there are no symptoms. This person feels completely well. If they haven't had a blood test, there is no way of knowing they're carrying the virus. And this state of affairs may continue for many years. Now, some people will develop swollen glands in the neck and the armpits and the groins. This is not necessarily a bad thing. These glands may come and go. They indicate the virus is present, and probably more importantly, they indicate that the body is active against the virus. So that's the stage of swollen glands. Sooner or later, many people develop symptoms, and then we say they have ARC, AIDS-related complex. 3 or 4 nights a week, they may suddenly get drenching sweats and have to get out of bed and change the bedding. They start to lose weight, 5 or 10 kilograms without dieting. By now they may have troublesome diarrhea or an attack of bronchitis that they can't fight off. This is ARC. The virus is now at work. Most of those people eventually go on to develop what we usually call full-blown AIDS. By now the immune system is paralyzed. The individual starts to suffer from unusual infections, unusual tumors. The course may be fluctuating, but there is an inevitable downward progression leading to death. Now, what about for an individual who's acquired the virus? Well, we're probably still too early in the epidemic to be sure. Many people progress right through this process. The longer we have to observe the epidemic, the more people we see at least starting to go through this process. That's for the individual. Let's now look at the process for the community as a whole. Here we have a graph that shows the progress of the epidemic within the United States. And you will see that steady, ever upward climb of the number of cases. The second line here shows the experience in Australia. And Australia has a very similar curve. We are following the American experience. There is no evidence of a flattening off of the epidemic in the United States. There is no reason to expect that we will not follow the United States experience. There is no flattening off of the Australian curve either. This is a very daunting prospect indeed. Here we have an epidemic that is exploding. There is no short-term prospect of a vaccine, and there is even less prospect of a cure in the short or the intermediate range. All we have is prevention. We know how the virus is spread. The means to protect ourselves lies in our own hands. The first mode of spread is sexual intercourse, and we must learn about safe sex and about safer sex. There are only two forms of safe sex. Number one, sex between an exclusively monogamous couple who are virus-free and have no other risk factors. That means there's no cheating, neither has the virus, and neither is exposed to the virus in any other way. The virus simply cannot get into that relationship. The only other form of safe sex is no sex at all. After that, we are talking about safer sex. We're talking about reduction of risk. And Sister Sue Porter from the STD clinic at the Royal Newcastle Hospital will talk about this.
Safer sex means the correct use of condoms. And when condoms are used correctly, they form a barrier against the AIDS virus and other sexually transmitted diseases. When buying condoms, always check on the pack to see that they do conform to Australian standards. Also, the use-by date, because the closer they are to expiry, the more likely they are to break. Be sure to always use a new condom each time sexual intercourse begins. Condoms are easy to use, but there are some important points to remember. After removing from the package, make sure the condom is ready to be unrolled on the outside. You will see a teat. This is for the collection of semen. Air should be expelled from this teat by clasping between 2 or 3 fingers and then carefully unrolling onto the erect penis all the way to the base. If you choose to use a lubricant, water-soluble lubricants should only be used. Vaseline and oil-based lubricants do significantly weaken condoms. After ejaculation, the penis should be removed whilst holding firmly onto the condom. This prevents spillage. Then we have a condom to dispose of. The safest way to dispose of condoms is to place in a plastic bag, any plastic bag will do, and then in a garbage.
Safe sex and safer sex. If we can't be good, let's make sure that we're careful. The second mode of spread, blood-to-blood contact through intravenous drug users. Now, we can't support the abuse of drugs under any circumstances. But the community must make sure that those people that will continue to use drugs have access to clean needles and syringes under appropriate circumstances. Now, where this isn't possible, we must be very sure that users know how to clean their needles and their syringes. For us as individuals, we're probably more concerned about accidental exposure, supposing we have to attend an accident. Now, our skin is a perfect barrier. It is the best barrier against HIV. If our skin is intact, the virus simply cannot get through. But we may have cuts or scratches, and when we attend a victim, we may cut ourselves. And under those circumstances, it's best to be sure, and that means wear gloves. Afterwards, we have to clean up the mess. And for that, we have bleach and we have methylated spirits. And at the end, when we clean up the mess, please remember, place it all safely in a plastic bag. So there we have it. The AIDS epidemic is growing, and it will continue to grow in the foreseeable future. we do need to worry. We need to worry about the threat to our healthcare system and indeed to the very fabric of our society. We need to worry about how the poorer, less developed nations will cope with this new and unwelcome burden. And of course, we need to have compassion for those unfortunate individuals who will suffer and will die because they're already infected. But at the personal level, we can feel very secure. Our safety is in our own hands. If we don't sleep with someone who's infected with the virus, and we don't share needles and syringes, then all we need to worry about is a few simple, basic rules of hygiene. The facts are very simple, but the solutions must really be up to us.